Alrighty, good to see you all. This last meeting of Black History Month. It's not our only special month. We're going to have another one coming up. Does anyone know? Anyone know what it is? Anybody? Next month is a special month too. Nobody? No. Women's History Month. Yeah. So we'll talk about holy women, Catholic women, American women who are on their way to sainthood as well. So you're not out of the woods yet, Ms. Oler. Okay? So I'm going to finish up Black History Month talking about this beautiful Black Catholic lady who's on her way to sainthood, Sister Thea Bowman. Thea Bowman, servant of God. Servant of God. Is that three? Three? Okay. Is it always three or usually more? Okay. It's like we got 1937 is when she was born. She died in 1990. She was born in Mississippi. Born in Mississippi and raised in the Methodist denomination. Again, another Methodist. I don't know what it is about Methodists and sainthood, but they must be doing something right in the Methodist church or Methodist community. So she was also raised in a Methodist family, Methodist Christian family. And at the age of 9, very early, with the permission of her parents, she converted to Roman Catholicism. She entered into full communion. And also very early in her life, she decided she did want to be a sister. She felt called to religious life. And so at the age of 15, it's very young, she entered the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration in Wisconsin. Franciscans, yes, Franciscan. We know about the Franciscans from Servant of God, Martin DePore's ward, who joined the Conventual Franciscans. This is a women's group that is connected to, they're not part of the original Franciscans, but there are a lot of sisters groups that have a Franciscan spirituality. So this is them, and their spirituality is adoration of the Blessed Eucharist. So I guess for 24 hours, their charism, their special sauce was to have a sister in front of the tabernacle 24 hours a day, in prayer and worship before Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. Don't know if they can do that now, seeing as most sisters are either dead or gone. But nevertheless, there she is in her habit, her uniform as a Franciscan sister of perpetual adoration. So she went from the heat of Mississippi up to the cold of Wisconsin. Ooh. Anyways, so she was up there. She got a PhD in English literature at the Catholic University of America. She worked on, and she devoted herself really to the Black Catholic experience, Black Catholic spirituality and stuff like that. She was either the editor or the composer of a Black hymnal, so taking songs amongst Black Catholics and including them in a song book. But unfortunately, she got cancer. And she died in 1990. Oh, I should say she was the only Black nun in her group when she joined. They're all whites, apparently. She was the only Black in her group. But they admitted her, which is nice. Anyway, so she got cancer and died in 1990. And in 2018, they opened up her cause, recognizing her as a very holy woman, possibly a saint in our midst. And so she is at the level of servant of God. So I ask, servant of God, Thea Bowman, to pray for us. And also maybe shoot up a little prayer to Jesus for our Pope, who might be dying. Pope Francis might be on his way out. So if you want to send him your thoughts and maybe a little prayer that he has a happy death with Sister Thea. Amen. Okay, where are we here? It's not what I want. This is what I want. This is what I want. Gonna fit that in. Maybe I can fit it in somewhere else without confusing everybody. Back to Judaism. Where were we? Here we were. Hopefully we'll get beyond this. Where am I? Where am I in my notes? Okay, so I was talking about the forefathers, the ancestors of Judaism, which are so important to understanding their religion. God calls this guy Abram or Abraham and says, I'll be your special God if you worship only me. I'll give you land. I'll make you a big family. And none of this comes to pass. Which is why I love the Bible and the Jewish God, because the Jewish God is a comedian. He's got a real great sense of humor. Because nothing happens, Abram is living in Canaan. Sarai is not getting pregnant. He's bought a plot of land, but he doesn't own all of it. It's not a nation. And he, of course, since Sarai is not getting pregnant, he has no children. So where are all these promises going, Hey, Lord, what's going on? And so Abram actually, and this is where I ended last time, because I want to mention this person, because it's very important for our when we get to the religion of Islam. So Abram gets a little bit antsy because Sarai is not getting pregnant. Of course, Abraham could have been shooting blanks. It could have been all, why blame God, Go to the fertility clinic. Get Abram checked. Maybe he has low motility. I'm going to burn in hell for these two. I'm going to get to heaven and Jesus is going to be there like with Abraham and say, remember what you said about him in your class? And Abraham. So Abraham decides he can't wait for God anymore. So he has a slave girl named Hagar. He takes his slave girl Hagar and has sex with her. Actually, his wife Sarai told him to do this, Ms. Older. The wife wanted it. So, he's got to do what his wife wants, right? So he has sex with the slave girl who conceives and has a son named Ishmael. All right. So technically, according to the idea of the culture and the time, Ishmael was technically Abraham's son, even though he wasn't of Abraham's wife, because Sarai adopts Ishmael as her own child in a way, even though she really doesn't like Ishmael very much. But because she wants children and God isn't producing. So Abraham, kind of like the man of faith, right? Has to kind of feels like he has to take things in his own hand. And God appears and says, no, Ishmael's not going to be the one. Okay? He blesses Ishmael, but he's like, no, okay? And eventually Sarah gets kind of jealous of Hagar because Hagar is fertile and she is not. And she kicks Hagar out of the club. And Hagar flees, according to tradition, down into the land of Arabia, which will be important for us later because this is where the story of Islam will emerge and become important. And, Muslims will see their connection to Judaism through Ishmael, who is, could say the firstborn of Abraham, his first child. So there's that connection. Nevertheless, God does eventually make Sarai pregnant, and she gives birth to Isaac. And this is the one that, according to the book of Genesis, God approves of. God is going to have the family line go not through Ishmael and Hagar, but from the true son of Sarai, which is Isaac, okay? Who's really a small player in the story. That's why he's in smaller type and in brackets, because he's more like a mediator. He's kind of a mediating figure to get to this guy. This is the really important guy, even probably more important than Abraham, Jacob. Because it's from Jacob. Jacob, he's the one that the name Israel comes from, okay? Because God changes his name to Israel. All right? Which means Israel, and maybe I say this later, but I'll say it now just in case I don't have it later in my notes. But Yisrael means God rules. God is the ruler, is what it means. Anyways, So God changes the name of this man, Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, changes his name to Israel, which means that he has a changed status in relationship to God. And Israel has 12 sons, roundabouts. There are different lists in the Bible. And some of them are 12, some of them are 11, some of them are 13, I think. So, anyways, whatever. People are trying to remember a long time later. But nevertheless, traditionally, he has 12 sons. And it's from these 12 sons and their families, their tribes, that the Jews come from. So remember, I was talking about the different names that we use that are used for Jews. You have Semite from Noah's son Shem. And then you have, Hebrew from Eber. Hebrew from Eber, one of their ancestors. But also that might be from just their name as a sociological group when they were known as the Apiru or Habiru, right? Okay? They just might be making up a story saying, oh yeah, that was the name of our ancestor. But then we have Israel. So they're called the sons and daughters of Israel. So now we have Israelite. And that's how the Jews are really known. They're known as the sons and daughters of Israel. A true Jew. Like I told you, if you're born of a Jewish mother, you're a Jew. But if you're not, then you have to convert. And in the language of Judaism, those who convert are called sons and daughters of Abraham. So in the synagogue, if a convert, even though they're fully a Jew, technically, but when they get up to read from the sacred scriptures, they'll say, Benjamin, a son of Abraham, our father, gets up to read from the book of Leviticus. Okay. But if it's a person of Jewish parentage, a Jewish mother, not a convert at all, then they'd say Shlomo or Mariam. Well, no, not a woman, but a man. Shlomo, a son of Israel, gets up to read from the book of such and such. So they still, even today in the synagogue, more traditional synagogues, make that distinction between someone who is truly an Israelite, truly comes from one of these family groups of Jacob. Okay, and that's what a tribe is, a social group that is marked by distinct and unified characteristics, in this case, a particular family. The Latin word tribus means a division of a group of people. That's simply what it means, like basically a group. So you can say the 12 groups of this man, Israel. Remember, it's a man, Ms. Uttenreither. It's not the name of a country. Okay, it will become the name of a country and the name of a kingdom later, but essentially it's the name of Jacob, who is also known as Israel, and his family groups. One of Jacob's sons is named Yehuda. One of these family groups, the father of that group is Yehuda, or Judah, as we transliterate it into English. And hence, we have Israelites, and now we have, this is where the word Jew derives from, Yehuda, Judah. Okay, so the belief is that most, Jews ultimately derive from this one son, this one family of the family groups of Jacob, Judah, hence Jew. And this is where the story gets a little bit weird. And, as I showed you on the map, there are two origins for the Jews. There's in southern Iraq, in Mesopotamia, or maybe even northern Mesopotamia in Aram. But then I said Egypt, right? So which is it? Did they come from southern Mesopotamia or did they come from Egypt? It's weird, but if you follow the biblical story, there are these two memories that the Jews are associated with southern Mesopotamia and with the nation of Egypt. Because Jacob, and not Jacob himself, but the family, God bless you, the family groups of Jacob eventually migrate down into Egypt, where they apparently stay for several centuries, like 400 years. And the Bible says that they were enslaved by the locals. They were oppressed by the locals, made to do manual labor and stuff like that. That's the story, okay? What could archaeology tell us? Well, not much, We know that there were Semites, Semitic groups living in northern Egypt, not in Canaan, and may have moved up to Canaan at some point in time and brought their stories with them and mixed in with the local Semites of Canaan. But that's about as much as archaeology can tell us. We know Semites were there. We don't know if it's Jacob's children, we don't know. But that's what the Bible says. But they eventually, as the story goes, the oppression was broken. God intervenes and sends a liberator for his people, the Israelites. But at some point, the traditional date is around 1250 BC. Okay, that's a traditional date based on information in the Bible, but who knows? But at some point, there seems to have been a migration of Semitic peoples from Egypt up into Canaan, and this is called the Exodus or the exit. Exit. It's exactly what Exodus means in Greek. Ex hodos. Ex out of. Hodos means a way or a path, so a way out or an exit. So, it's their way out, their exit from Egypt, their liberation, their freedom from slavery or oppression in Egypt. The Exodus. So this is a pivotal event in Jewish history, in the history of Judaism. It's celebrated at the Passover every year. I mean, the whole opening books of the Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible deal with it. It's mentioned throughout the Jewish scriptures. So it's a very big event. It's a defining event for the group, the Exodus. Okay. What can archaeology tells us? Not much. I mean, archaeologically, there isn't any record of a mass migration in the Egyptian texts or the monuments that we've discovered so far, but anyone who knows archaeology knows that, we're pretty sure a lot has not been discovered, and stuff that's been discovered sits in boxes at university, basements until somebody can pick through them and categorize them. It's a lot of work. So there's always the possibility there might be something there in some Egyptian tablet that someone just hasn't, that's in, the University of Pennsylvania or Cornell or someplace. But whatever, that's not much of an argument. What we do know from what we do have positive evidence is we just don't have any record of it. And why would the Egyptians mention it? If the Habiru were just a bunch of nomads, or the Jews were just a bunch of slaves, lower class people in their society who would taken notice of them to begin with. But again, that's an argument from silence. It doesn't really get you anywhere. Nevertheless, we do have archaeological evidence of Israel existing. The word is used. There is apparently a group in Canaan living in Canaan at the time, not in Egypt, that is mentioned as Israel. And I don't have it here should have put it on my PowerPoint. Oh well, I didn't put it on the PowerPoint, but it doesn't matter. I'm telling it to you. Okay, so we do have some archaeological evidence for the existence of the Israelites, just not in Egypt at the time. Nevertheless, according to the story, this man Moses appears sometime around maybe the 1500s or the 1200s, depending on when you want to date it. This man Moses, supposedly, don't worry about that. Some scholars wonder if Moses even existed or if he's just a creation of Jewish tradition, is just a legend. I think he probably did exist, just because if you're going to make up a Jewish legend, you wouldn't give him a non-Jewish name, apparently. And Moses is not a Hebrew name. It's an Egyptian name. Moshe. Okay? So, for example, you have Egyptian kings like Ramses, which is based on the same name. Okay, you see there, Thutmose was another Egyptian king. All right. So, again, I'm supposing here, so take it for what it's worth, But if you're going to make up a character, who's a Hebrew and the liberator of the Hebrews, you don't give him a Hebrew name. You give him an Egyptian name, the people who are your enemies, your oppressors. Weird. But that's why I love history. You can't make this stuff up. So Moses, if he does exist, is a Jew apparently, but he's given a non-Jewish name, an Egyptian name, which has to be explained. So if you read the book of Exodus, whoever wrote it has to explain how Moses has an Egyptian name. So they explain it by saying, well, he was raised by Egyptians. He was raised by Egyptians, but he was really a Jew. Okay, interesting. So Moses has an experience of God. God appears to Moses and tells him, okay, I want to free my people now. They've been in Egypt long enough. And so he sends Moses to free the Jewish slaves. And he's going to lead the Jews back to the land that God promised to Abraham, Canaan, Palestine. And so he does. And along the journey, along the Jews migrating back to Canaan from Egypt, God makes a covenant. I talked about this. Yes, a covenant, a contract, an agreement. Yes, the covenant is a major part of Jewish identity. God makes a special covenant with Moses and through Moses with the Israelites, where he kind of solidifies his relationship. God gives a whole bunch of laws and rules for the Jews to follow, to show their obedience to him, to show their faithfulness. And in return, God will return their faithfulness with his blessings. So it's through Moses that this law is given about how the Jews are supposed to live. So this event of the giving of the law, this Barney. Do you do that when you're on the bench, No, of course not. You don't do it on the bench. Because you want to play. The coach sees you doing, oh, well, I guess you're too tired to play. Sit. Uttenreither, you're in. Miss Crumpton. Shuttle runs, Miss Crumpton. I got to help you out. God bless you. So this event of God giving the law through Moses also, and the Exodus generally, shapes Judaism. Okay? And when we look at the Jewish scriptures later, I'll speak a little bit more. Well, I'll mention it later. I'll mention it later when we talk about the scriptures, because a lot of the Jewish scriptures are centered on this event. I mean, it's so important, this idea of the covenant through Moses, that the covenant idea is even retrojected. It's thrown back into earlier stories, like with Abraham, that God makes a covenant with Abraham. So they kind of place that idea in the story, but it's most important with this guy Moses. Okay. The Jews go back to Canaan, or they've always been there. Who knows? But anyways, according to the biblical story, they go back, and each of the family groups settles in its particular area of Canaan. Amongst the natives, amongst the Canaanites, there are people there, Philistine, Moabites. The Jews are mixed in with all these other groups. It's not like everyone was a Jew here, everyone was an Israelite. There are other groups mixed in. But this is where the groups are traditionally said to have settled their areas of each of the sons of Jacob, Israel. Right? Eventually, this grouping of families becomes a monarchy, a kingdom. They want a ruler to bring unity to them. And so for a period of time, the Jews have kings. The first king in the United Monarchy, you can see the dates there from around 1000 to 900 BC. The first king is a man named Shaul ben Kish, Saul the son of Kish, who was the first Jewish king around 1000. That's about all that's important about him, basically. For our purposes, he was their first king. There is, Saul's son Ishbaal. That's why I have him on the PowerPoint. Ishbaal is his son who attempts to succeed but there is a civil war with this man named David of the tribe of Judah. And David and his followers win. And so David takes over power and is anointed as king. He is made king. And so he's a very big figure. Again, like Moses, he's like the next big figure in the Bible, King David. He did a number of things. He made Jerusalem the capital. The capital moved around a lot in the Bible. It was like, not the best map. You got it from Jehovah's Witnesses. God bless them. I mean, I don't believe Jehovah's Witnesses, but they do have great free Bible study stuff. So, hey, I don't care. Yes, sir.
How long was the first guy? How long?
Not that long. No, you see 1,000 to, well, depending on how. I'm trying to think, how many decades? It was a few decades. And Saul, no, he didn't die naturally, right? He fell on his sword in battle, I think, and killed himself. Yeah, maybe 40 or 50 years, I want to say. But I could be wrong. But a few decades. Anyway, I'm trying to look close here if I go back to the other map. Maybe that's a better map. Not really. Anyways, he made Jerusalem. Oh, that's a better map. Shiloh, places like Shiloh, where I just saw it. Now you go. There you are, Shiloh and Shechem. They don't have Samaria here, but Bethel. Where's Bethel? Where's Bethel? But he makes Jerusalem the capital, the city of Jerusalem, which was not a Jewish city. He attacks it and he takes it from the people who are there, and he makes Jerusalem his capital. He defeated the enemies around the kingdom, so he brought some peace and stability to the kingdom. And he at least came up with the idea of building a temple to the God of the Israelites. Okay? Before that, basically the Jews worshipped in a tent. But he wanted to found a physical building, a structure for his God. But he doesn't build it, though. It's his son who will later succeed him, named Solomon. So that's why he's on the PowerPoint. So David he initiates plans to build a house of God for worship, but it's his son Solomon who actually does it. David is not the first Jewish king, but he is seen as the greatest of the Jewish kings. He has a special relationship with God. Do I want to mention him? Well, I will mention him. Yeah. Special relationship with God. We'll come back to David later when we talk about the idea of a Messiah or a Christ. Okay, because God promises to David that his kingdom will never end. Okay, and yet it does end. Because, of course, David dies. But he is succeeded by his son Solomon, or Shlomo, Solomon, who reigned around 970 to 931. He's the one who starts work on the temple, and in order to build the temple, he actually turns the northern tribes up into like slaves. He almost enslaves the 10 northern tribes, or the several northern tribes, and puts them to work building this temple in Jerusalem, which causes a lot of anger, a lot of enmity between the northern tribes and the southern tribes, of which, of course, Solomon was, because he was a Judahite. Solomon, there are positive traditions about Solomon and negative memories about him. The positive memories say he was a very wise king, known for his wisdom. But the negative tradition criticizes him because he had many wives. He was a polygamist. So he had a number of wives. And a number of those wives were foreign wives. They weren't Israelites, who brought their gods with them and set up little shrines to their false gods in the view of the biblical writers. And so they kind of perverted the Jews' faith in the one God. They're only supposed to worship the God of Abraham. But he brought in his wives who were worshiping all these other gods. When Solomon dies, he's succeeded by his son Rehoboam. Rehoboam, who may have not been a Jew at all, because his mother was one of those foreign wives. She was an Ammonite. Ammonites were from over here. So not necessarily, technically maybe not a Jew because his mother wasn't Jewish, and yet he's the Jewish king. So we already see some problems going on here. And Rehoboam, the northern tribes come to Rehoboam and they say, you know what? Solomon really worked us hard and treated us badly. We're hoping that you will, kind of lighten the load and be more just in treating us because we're fellow Israelites, And Rehoboam decides, he kind of asks his advisors, well, how should I respond to this? And some of his advisors say, well, you should be gentle with them. You should acknowledge the problem and try to change it. But he has other advisors who are like, no, screw them. Get back to work, building the temple, Guess which advisors Rehoboam listens to? Rehoboam's answer is, if my father beat you with rods and sticks, I will beat you with scorpions. So that kind of lets them know that his reigner, the answer is no. That would be a no, boss, right? No raise, no. So the northern tribes break away, 932 BC. The northern, why did I say 932 BC? Yeah, that's right. The northern tribes secede, got my dates mixed up, and found their own, they choose their own king and set up their own kingdoms. Now you have the United Kingdom of Israel divided into a northern kingdom called, confusingly, Ms. Callahan, I know, Israel, and the southern kingdom, which is the line of David, is known as Judah, with the capital still in Jerusalem. Samaria eventually becomes the capital of Israel. So 932 BC, you have this separation. The period of the divided kingdom. And eventually what happens is the next big date that you should know is 721 BC. Because what happens is an empire from the north, I don't know if I put a map on here, another map, bigger map. Well, I'll have to go back to this map. But an empire from the north in Syria, modern day Syria, but was up here, called the Assyrian Empire, comes down south and attacks the northern kingdom and destroys it in 721. 721. So the northern kingdom is no more. In 721. Destroyed. What happens to the Jews? Well, they're deported. At least the rich people, the rich Jews are. That was usually the practice. The poor people never have anything anyone wants. So they left the poor people alone. But the middle class and the rich people were all exiled to different parts of the world. We have no idea where they went to. And then, the Assyrians moved in their own people, their own settlers to take over the land. And this, if you're curious, I put the Syrians on it. If you're curious about the story as it's recounted by the biblical authors, you can read the second book of Kings, chapter 17, where it describes the destruction of the kingdom of Israel. Judah is not destroyed. Judah is spared somehow, miraculously. And here we get, interestingly enough, I told you that the capital of the northern kingdom was Samaria, right, Ms. Moore? Samaria? So here we get these people called Samaritans. There they are. In Israel, put that down, who are living in Israel even to this day, who claim descent from the original dwellers in the kingdom of Israel. Okay, we're not sure about their origins or their relationship with the Jews, but they seem to have some relationship. Okay, because they're mentioned in the Bible. So as early as the biblical writers. So they've been around for a while. And the Bible explains the presence of the Samaritans as saying that they are the descendants of those colonists that the Assyrians sent. Okay? The Assyrians sent their own people into the former kingdom of Israel to live there. And they were suffering all sorts of disasters. Wild animals were attacking and killing them. They might have had a famine or something like that. And they put it down to the fact that they were disrespecting the Israelite God. They weren't worshiping him properly. They didn't know how to worship him. But the Israelites did. So they sent some priest from the exiles back down to the former kingdom of Israel, to teach the Assyrians how to worship the God of Israel, and imported back in the religion. That's how the Bible explains it. Samaritans have their own stories and legends about where they come from. They claim that they're from they're from one of the tribes of Israel's sons, Joseph, and that they have authority through Moses. They acknowledge Moses, and they claim that the split between them and the Jews came about not because of some invasion, but because there was a question about who should be the high priest of the Jews, offering the sacrifices. And the Jews followed one candidate, and the Samaritans accepted another. But the Samaritans mostly have the same beliefs as Jews. They worship the one God of Israel. They have the law of Moses. So they have just the first 5 books of the law of Moses. They don't accept later writings. They follow the same feasts and festivals as Jews, like the Passover. This is what they're doing. They're celebrating the Passover here on the mountain for their temple. They had their own temple on Mount Gerizim. And during the Passover, they go to Mount Gerizim every year in Israel to offer the sacrifice of the lamb and celebrate their Passover. They circumcise their male children. There it is, I guess he's their high priest, I'm assuming, holding up the scriptures, the Torah rolls. Yes. There aren't very many of them. In fact, they seem to be getting less. There was only according to a study in 2022, this was at least on Wikipedia, I'm assuming the source is legit, but there are only 874 Samaritans living in Israel now. I had an older statistic that they were up maybe 1,000, so they seem to be dying out, unfortunately. In 2004, there was a genetic study done of the Samaritan community, which has established that there is some sort of common genetic ancestry with the Jews. So they're linked somehow, genetically. Anyway, so there they are. And they're considered another religion by Jews. Even though, there you go, there's my map. How did I miss that? Oh, well. Could have used this map. Oh, well, that's, whatever. I still need it. Because our next date is 587, 721. Now we go to 587, because I told you the kingdom of Judah survived for a little while longer, but not that much longer, maybe a century and a half, I guess, because another empire emerged in the region of Iraq called Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. And Babylon came over and put the screws to the kingdom of Judah, and destroyed the kingdom, invaded the kingdom of Judah, and eventually destroyed it and ended it in 587. And did the same thing, as was common practice, took all the rich people, the middle class, exiled them to Babylon, all the way over to here, to southern Iraq. Okay? Left the poor people alone. Destroyed the temple. So 587, the temple of Solomon, the first temple in Jerusalem, was destroyed. It was burned with fire by the Babylonians. So this period of time is known as the Babylonian exile. Okay, and as I told you, with the northern kingdom, we don't know where the tribes went, but we do know where the Judahites went. They went to Babylon, and then they'll later come back. So that's where we get That's really where modern Jews derive from, the Judahites of the kingdom of Judah. So the temple's destroyed, okay? It's impossible to travel to Jerusalem to fulfill the temple requirements. The regulations of the Jewish law pretty much become a dead letter or impossible to observe. So now there's a void in Jewish religion. So we see certain institutions start arising during the Babylonian exile, which continue much later into this day. Okay? Institutions like the synagogue, like scribes or rabbis, teachers of the law, the Sanhedrin, a religious council to decide how to follow the law and stuff like that. So there are your definitions. A synagogue just simply means a coming together or bringing, there it is, bringing in together. Synagoge, to come together. An assembly place, you could also say synagogue. So it's a place of Jewish worship and instruction, where you go to worship and where you go to, learn about your religion, okay? Be educated. And the educators were known as scribes. These were the ones who were experts in the law, because you needed people to now interpret, okay, we can't go to the temple anymore for our pilgrimage feasts or for sacrifices. So now what do? How do we observe them in this foreign territory without these things? So you have scribes who are religious scholars of the law. You have a council the scribes are the bearers of the tradition to remember the stories. And this is probably, scholars think, this period and after the exile, when the Jews return, is when they really start thinking, maybe we should start writing some of our traditions down. Because people are getting killed and institutions are being destroyed. Maybe we should write some of the things that we've collected or things we've been saying, our stories down, or copy stories that have been collected, so they don't go into the mists of history. So they're bearers of the tradition. And then you have a council of religious authorities who can then decide questions for Jews around the world, because they're living in, they're living in a foreign country, and a lot of the laws that they have only really apply to the land of Israel. But they're not in the land of Israel anymore. So what do? What kind of animals can you eat? The law, the law of Moses, it was pretty much focused on the land of Canaan and the animals that are there, but you might have different animals in Babylon. So can you eat them, or are they kosher or not? How do you perform the pilgrimage feast? How do you go back to Jerusalem for Passover or whatever, the Feast of Tabernacles or something? You can't travel there anymore. So you need a group of scholars to kind of work these things out, and that's the Sanhedrin. Sunhedrion is a place to sit, like a council. God bless you. You have a governing council, student council or something. People are sitting around, a Sunhedrion. Okay, you're sitting together. The exile does not continue forever for the Jews. At a certain point, usually dated to around 539, the Babylonian Empire is itself invaded and destroyed by the Persians, modern-day Iran. And a lot of Jews are now freed or feel free to move back to their home, what they consider their homeland in Canaan, in Israel. And so a lot of them do. Not all of them, but a lot of them do, or at least try to. And so we have the Second Temple period, where a lot of Jews, after the exile, move back to the land of Israel, and they try to reestablish their religious life. They they start rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. So this is the Second Temple. Hence the Second Temple period, Missouri, yes? Logical, okay? Which, as you can see, extends for a long time, like 500 years. The main person to remember from this period is a man named Ezra the Scribe, who flourished. So the FL means he flourished. You use that when you don't know exactly when a person was born or died. But he flourished in, as you can see, like the 5th century, 465 to 359. And he's kind of the impetus behind rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, which had lain in ruins all that time. I mean, it was, it's described in the Bible, people came back and the shock of seeing the holy city and the temple still 50 some years later, still in ruins. No one had tried to rebuild it. So they start rebuilding it. As his name shows you, he's a scribe, he's a religious intellectual. He's also a priest from Babylon who returns to Judea to reinstate the observance of the law. As I mentioned, rebuild the temple. According to Jewish tradition, he is also the one who actually founded the great Sanhedrin, the Council of Religious Experts. And he's considered the father of Judaism. He's considered the true father of Judaism, what we understand as Judaism today, although I have to say minus the temple because was destroyed again. But you had the temple, you had the Sanhedrin, okay, you had the scribes, and so a lot of the structures that Jews are familiar with even today seem to derive from Ezra. And his story is told in the Bible. There's the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah, which also Ezra is mentioned in. So he's a very important figure. And in Jewish tradition, the Tosefta Sanhedrin, don't worry about this, we'll learn what the Tosefta is later. There's this statement, Ezra was worthy for the Torah to have been given to him, had not Moses come before him. So Ms. Oler, if Moses had not gotten there first, been born first, Ezra was worthy to have received the law. So that's how important he is to Judaism. He's almost on the same level as Moses, the great lawgiver and freedom fighter. Around this time, the Messiah idea develops, which we're going to talk about later in the context of Judaism. We'll also mention it in the context of, Mr. Whitehawk, Christianity, or Messianism, you could say, Messiahanity, Okay, that's basically what Christ is. It's the same thing as Messiah. So followers of the Messiah, their religion. But anyways, we have this idea of the Messiah that emerges after the exile and maybe during the exile. The belief that there will be a king savior who will come, who will be descended from the great King David. And this king savior will come to finally liberate and free the Jews from all their enemies so that Jews might live in peace. So he's a future ruler, a ruler to come. Not clearly described in the Jewish scriptures. It's a development amongst Jews, but it's not clearly evident in their sacred writings. And not all Jews believed in a Messiah. But as I said, we'll talk more about this later. Then we come to this dude. We had to get to him eventually, right, Mr. Belfield, Well, he is a Jew, and I would say he's the most famous Jew that ever lived. I don't think that can be contradicted, People know Jesus. They know this man, Jesus of Nazareth, who lived from 6 BC until 33 AD. So he was born before he was born, right, Ms. Crumpton? He was born before he was born. I'll explain how that happened when we get to Christianity. Not now. But so, we have this first century Jew who starts a reform movement within Judaism based around himself. He claimed, or possibly claimed, or some of his followers claimed that he was the fulfillment of this promise of a king savior, a Messiah. Hence, he's also called Jesus Christ, or Jesus the Christ. But ultimately, his teachings and his reform movement and his claims, whether alleged claims or actual claims, were rejected by the Jewish leadership, and he was handed over to the Romans for execution. So the Romans ultimately killed Jesus, this Jesus as a criminal, but his movement continues. And so that's the connection with Christianity, and we'll talk more about Jesus and stuff like that, why he was killed, his history, when we get to Christianity. But he is there. He is a Jew, and he's part of Jewish history. We get our great world religion coming from him, one of them, Christianity. The next date to remember, so we've got what? 932 is the separation of the United Kingdom. What is it? 721 is the destruction of the Northern Kingdom. 587 is the destruction of the Southern Kingdom. 70 AD is the next major date and event in Jewish history, because you have what's called the Jewish-Roman War, or the Jewish War, from 66 until 73 AD. Okay, the Jews had not, since the Assyrian, since Judah was, Israel was destroyed and Judah was destroyed. The Jews had never, for a long time, been under their own control or their own leadership, and this time was no different. They were under the control at this time of the Roman Empire. The Romans from Italy came from Italy, and the Romans had invaded the area in 63 BC and annexed Palestine. Okay. And the Romans were very antagonistic to the Jews. They didn't understand them because they would only worship their God and not any other gods. So there was that kind of cultural and religious misunderstanding. The Romans would antagonize the Jewish population. The Jews did not feel they were respected by the Romans. And so there were a number of revolts during this period. But everything comes to a head in the 60s, the late 60s, where the Roman governor sent soldiers into the temple, the house of their god, the Jewish god, and took money from the treasury of the temple. A grave insult and blasphemy, a sacrilege, great offense to the God of the Jews. And so the Jews went bananas. They revolted. And for a period of time, they actually were causing a lot of trouble for the Romans. But the Romans were stronger. And in 70 AD, the Romans attacked Jerusalem. They burned down the second temple. They destroyed it. And you can see their handiwork to this day. It still lies destroyed in Jerusalem. It's never been rebuilt. They destroyed it. And I say the Romans, but actually if you look at some of the historical information, that is actually a question mark. Who actually destroyed the temple? Because traditionally, I was always told the Romans destroyed and burned down the second temple in 70 AD. But if you read some other things, like I mentioned Josephus. No, I didn't mention Josephus Flavius in this class. But there's a Jewish historian from the first century named Josephus who wrote some histories about his people, the Jews, for the Romans, for a Roman audience, to kind of explain Judaism to them and justify Judaism to them. But according to him, actually, it was the Jews in Jerusalem who started fires that were trying to use to repel the Roman army. And what he says is that actually the fires got out of control and they burned down the temple. So who knows? So that's the end of the Second Temple period. As a consequence of this revolt, and the Romans imposed a tax on the Jews, just the Jews, throughout the whole Roman Empire, just for being Jews, as a consequence of this, just to remind them who won, and because of the trouble they had caused the Romans. And the revenue of that tax went to the temple of Jupiter in Rome, so to a pagan god, the temple of Zeus. Jupiter is their name for Zeus in Rome. So a further insult. Not only did the Jews have to pay a tax because they were Jews and they were troublemakers, but the money that they paid went to a false or pagan god. So an insult upon injury. Or injury upon insult, I guess. Now we move into what's called the late classic in the Middle Ages. After 70 AD, the temple again was no more, so the people were in disarray. So what do? And according to legend, scholars aren't sure this actually happened, but this is the story. Some of the great thinkers and great religious scholars in the area of Palestine came together at a city on the coast here, actually down by Gaza, where there's some stuff going on now, called Jamnia, and they held a council, a meeting, to decide, what the heck are we going to do now? Because the temple's gone. How are we going to live Judaism in this context? So sometime around after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, they had this Council of Jamnia. And the city goes by different names. If you're looking for it on the internet and in books, sometimes it's called Yavne or Jabne. It goes by a number of different names. The traditional name is Jamnia, so I'll use Jamnia. And so the Jewish leaders established a school there to continue the Sanhedrin and to consolidate the Jewish religion. Okay? And this is when they start collecting the laws of Judaism, called the Mishnah, which we'll talk about later, and the legal interpretations of those laws that they believe go back to Ezra, but really these laws were collected apparently by this man Judah, called Judah the Prince, or Yehuda Hanasi, who lived in the 100s, the late 100s. And he was a scholar, and he collected the oral traditions that came from Ezra and ultimately from Moses into this thing called the Mishnah, which we'll talk about later. You have the emergence of the rabbi who is a religious professional, the name for a person who is formally trained in Jewish law and interpretation. The rabbi, it's kind of, you could say, is like, the scribe in a way, but is somewhat different. And so what you have is the emergence of what's called rabbinical Judaism. And that's what we have today. Okay? And we'll talk about, I'll mention this again with Christianity, but Christianity in what we have today, rabbinical Judaism, come from first century Judaism, this matrix of the first century. Okay? Up into the time of the 70s and the destruction of the temple. Okay? Because rabbinical, so you have Judaism, and then it branches off into two sister religions. Those Jews who thought that this man Jesus was the Messiah, the Messianists, later called Christians or Christians, and then those who followed the rabbis who come about because of the structure of the temple, which is rabbinical Judaism. Islam is connected to these two. It's not it's not a sister of Judaism. Islam is later connected to these two religions, both Christianity and Judaism, because you see the beliefs of both in Islam. Okay, this man Muhammad knew Christians and he knew Jews, and he kind of took their ideas and said, oh, this is true, that's not true, and put it together into his own kind of faith of what he believed, he thought was truly about God. But yeah, Christianity and Judaism come out of first century Judaism. So we have the emergence of rabbinical Judaism. Rabbi means my master. Rab means great. Okay? Actually, my great one. Rab means great. Rabbi, the E at the end means my. So my great one. Rabbi. But a lot of times they just translate it as my master. But literally it's my great one. I'm not going to talk about Bar Kokhba. I'll move along from him. Save some time. Yeah, it's interesting, but I'm not going to worry about it. Save a little bit of time. It's interesting, but it's not going to add much to the religious aspect. These events are important, and they do deal with the religious aspect. That sister religion that I talked about, the Messianists, the Jews that believe this guy Jesus was the Messiah, and they go their way, and you have those who are following the rabbis go their way. Well, lo and behold, when we look, quirks of history, Ms. Winko, it just so happens that this other Jewish religion, the Messianists, take over the Roman Empire. Even the emperor, the leader of the Roman Empire, becomes a Messianist, a Christian. In 313, the Roman emperor is converted to Christianity. His name was Constantine. Don't know if I mentioned him later. I think I mentioned him in the context of Christianity, but I'll just give you his name. Constantine. He believes in the Jewish God. So, hallelujah, right? Mr. Mattel, everything must be better for the Jews after this, right? I mean, the Roman emperor is believing in their Jewish Messiah, right? no, things don't get good for the Jews after Christians come into power. Even though they're all worshiping a Jewish man now. No, things get worse for the Jews. Because of course, as you know, if you have sisters in your family, and how brutal those fights can be. A lot of hair being pulled out, necessarily. Well, maybe not. Punches thrown, who knows? But yeah, when family members fight, they fight dirty because they know where it hurts. And the Christians certainly don't treat the Jews where they came from very well after this. But that's okay because later on, in the 7th century, a new religion emerges, new revelation that claims to be a perfection, a fulfillment of both God's revelation, both to the Jews and to the Christians, okay, called Islam. Yes, we'll talk more about this when we get to Islam. The founder of Islam, Muhammad, reverences Jesus. He honors Jesus, but he also honors Moses. He sees the origins of his faith in Christianity and Judaism, who are both bearers of God's revelation. Okay? So this new religion, this comes on the scene, Islam. So that should be good for the Jews, right? Well, Mr. Whitehawk, if you were a Jew and you had to choose, you would rather be with the Muslims than with the Christians. Because the Muslims did treat the Jews somewhat better, that were in their empire, the Islamic empire that develops in this period. Somewhat better than the Christians, but still not, you weren't equal, and you weren't free to worship as a Jew and stuff like that. You still had all sorts of laws, discriminatory laws and things like that. So things didn't necessarily get that much better under Islam, even though Islam claims roots in the beliefs of the Jews and Jewish religion, and they claim to worship the Jewish God. Or at least I should say the God who revealed himself to the Jews, like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses. That's be more specific about what they believe. All right. From the 7th century until the 11th century AD, in this medieval period, is called the age of the academics. And the Hebrew word used for academic is gaon, which means pride. Okay, someone you're proud of. Okay. And the plural is geonim, so you know. And it's a title. It's a title given to these academics. In medieval Iraq, mostly, remember I told you there were a lot of Jews who did not necessarily return to their homeland after the exile. There are a lot of Jews who stayed in Babylon, in Iraq, and established their own Sanhedrin there. Okay? So it was in a lot of Judaism, modern Judaism that we know of, doesn't come out necessarily of Palestine. It comes out of also Iraq. All right? And that's where, the academics come into play. They add there, what do I want to say here? Yes. You had the Center of Learning in Iraq, and you had the Center of Learning from Jamnia in Palestine. Actually, I think they moved it up to Galilee in the north. It was under the Geonim that collections of Jewish legal opinions and interpretations were collected. So that's where we get to the Talmud, what's called the Talmud. And we'll talk about the Talmud later. It's okay if you don't know. But it's a multi-volume, it's incomplete. They never even finished it, but it's a huge multi-volume collection of opinions on the interpretation of following Jewish law. And Orthodox Jews, faithful Jews, I should say faithful Jews, Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, any Jew really, Jewish man certainly, is supposed to study the Talmud every day. They also came up with the synagogue worship service and stuff like that. The Hebrew text of the Bible was fixed and standardized during this period. Okay, they added vowels, which Hebrew doesn't have vowels traditionally, but they remembered how the words were supposed to be pronounced. And finally, thank God, somebody decided, let's come up with a system of vowels and finally put them down, point the Hebrew letters so we know how they're supposed to actually be pronounced. So that happens during this period. The age of the academics. Yes, there's Constantine. There's a statue of Constantine. And there's Islam, the Islamic Empire. Okay. The modern period. The modern period. Oh, there we go. Which begins with the 1500s and extends to now, pretty much, 1948, the establishment of Israel, the nation of Israel. Here we're focusing on the Enlightenment that happens in Europe. It starts in England, and it spreads to places like France and Germany and becomes a thing. Okay? Kind of like wearing Uggs. You know? Though I don't know if people wear Uggs anymore. What do people wear now? What are you supposed to wear? I don't know. Someone tell me, please. I need to be told. Tell me what to wear. Tell me what to think. Huh? Still Uggs? Thank you. The modern period. So Enlightenment. And this affects the Jews religiously as well. They call this period the Haskalah. The Haskalah, which is their word for the Enlightenment. Haskalah. The changes that came with the modern period. The Enlightenment was focused on the use of human reason, the human reason for knowledge, rather than just citing authority, whatever authority it might be, religious authority or just previous authority. You wanted to think for yourself and also experience things for yourself. So modern science, testing things, seeing for yourself if traditional ideas from the past are accurate or not. Which there are new discoveries and exploration. North America is discovered, parts of Asia, Australia. What does that mean for Judaism then? The question comes up amongst Jews, some Jews, what's the point of adhering to the beliefs and customs of some primitive, pre-modern group of tribes, bunch of goat herders and sheep herders, or village dwellers from thousands of years ago? Well, what's the point of that? You even hear that today, You hear people make that argument whenever they talk about the Bible. Well, come on, it was written. These were just stories that were told by a bunch of shepherds around the fire at night, as if, therefore, they have no value, is kind of like the implication, I think. Well, that's kind of like what they were saying at the Enlightenment. This is nothing new, not a new argument. Why should I believe in the beliefs and practices? Some of them may be barbaric, like circumcision, cutting off the skin of a baby's penis or something like that. Why? Avoiding certain foods. I can't eat shrimp, but I can eat a cow. Why? What? Because in the Middle East, they had certain cultural issues with these animals? I don't know. So these questions come up, and the religious responses are first to accept the Haskalah, to accept the Enlightenment, and to get rid of things that no longer make reasonable sense to people in the modern world. So accept the Enlightenment, and there you get Reform Judaism founded. There were those who completely rejected the Enlightenment and said, no, these rules come from God, they are unchangeable. And there you have Orthodox Judaism. And then you have the centrist position where some try to say, okay, well, some things are changeable in the law of God and based on, yes, the culture of, a bunch of sheep herders or village dwellers and stuff. Okay, those can change, maybe like how we treat women and stuff like that. But other things, no, they're like what to eat or not eat and stuff like that to avoid. Those come from God. Those shouldn't change. And so you have what's called conservative Judaism. Middle of the road. They want to conserve as much as they can of their Jewishness. I wonder if I should talk about Zionism. It's more of well, yeah, I guess I should. It's political. A lot of it's political. But there are also religious connotations. a lot of people think that, Israel came from, or the nation of Israel came out of the Holocaust, which it, did. At least the Holocaust got the ball rolling a lot faster. But the ball was already rolling like a century before, or almost a century before, with this man, Theodor Herzl. You can see when he died, 1904, just 40, almost 40 years before the Holocaust, before Hitler. You didn't know Adolf Hitler. But he already had the idea that the Jews were so persecuted in so many places that they really needed their own nation state where they could live in peace, follow their own way of life of Judaism that they wanted to without under the control of others. And so Zionism is this desire, this wish, the movement to create a Jewish nation or homeland. Notice it's not to create the state of Israel in the Middle East. That'll come later. It's a desire for a homeland. And for Herzl, that was the only solution to anti-Semitism. And where to go? There wasn't, they didn't really much care where they went at first. I mean, there were different proposals. One proposal was to have all Jews migrate to Uganda in Central Africa. Of course, I'm not sure all the Ugandans would have been. I don't know what you would have done with the Ugandans who were there. I mean, it's, I've seen pictures of Uganda. I know where it is. And I think there were Africans living there. But that was an idea. Herzl himself favored Argentina. Yes, a lot of southern Argentina is the Pampas, which is kind of arid plains. Not a lot of people living there, almost no one living there. So, okay, buy a piece of the Pampa from Argentine government and go to Argentina. I don't know why they just didn't do like Western Australia or someplace like that where there was like nobody at the time. There's still nobody there. But anyways, Herzl later realized that really Israel was the true homeland of Jews. That's where their ancestors were from, as we learned, from the land of Canaan, Palestine. So really the intent was nationalistic. It wasn't religious in the beginning. It wasn't religious, but it will become that way. Yes, and why Zionism? Because Zion in Hebrew, or Zion in the Bible, is an ancient name for the city of Jerusalem. So Zionism, Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem. But then we have this event in Jewish history called the Holocaust that intervenes. The Holocaust from 1933 to 45. The Second World War was 1939 to 1945. And it wasn't started because of the Holocaust. No one cared about how Hitler was treating and the Nazis were treating the Jews, because they had already been treating the Jews very badly before World War II. It was because, for us, for the Brits, it was because Hitler invaded Poland more. And so that started the war. I got you. For a few more minutes, don't I? Let me see. Oh, yeah, one more minute. Got you. So what started World War II was that Adolf Hitler, or the government of Germany, the Nazi government, invaded the country of Poland. That's why. But we didn't get involved for a few years later. We only entered because Japan, who had nothing to do with the Holocaust, attacked Pearl Harbor. And Japan was allied with Germany. That's what brought us on. Not because all these Jews were being murdered. God bless America. Okay? We always do the right thing, don't we? Stand up for the little guy. Apparently not. At least not for the Jews. Anyway, so I guess on that remark, I will leave it there and come back to it next week when it'll be March, right? Yay! Have a good weekend, miss. Thank you.
Thanks, you have a good one.
Have a good day, sir.
I was gonna buy tickets. I was short like $10, so.
Have a good day, miss. Thanks.
Oh.
All right. Good day. Go ahead, sir. Thanks. All right, sir. Keep on trucking.
Only 3 more weeks to get this thing off.
Oh, good. God bless
And
you.
hopefully, PT will be back on the field.
Baseball? Yeah. Are you still going to practices just to keep in the mix, or?
I have been when it's nicer out.
Yeah.
Like when it's like over 50, I've been going. But when it's under 50, my toes get really cold.
Oh, okay. No, I understand. You too, sir. Oh, wait, I got that.